Connection. Why did Dennis turn into that right lane? He himself didn't know. It was as if some force had pushed me in the side and hissed in my ear. Here, Dennis recently became curious about who lives in these old wooden houses, built during the Soviet era, and where are they from, these houses there, in the very center, residential area, where there is one high-rise building after another, and the streets are short. A couple dozen houses, private sector. The boy sometimes went to school, or returned home, not every day of course, sometimes depending on the mood, when my soul is completely weighed down and gloomy, and here it was always so deserted, so quiet, always, this was exactly what was needed. Normal passers-by walked along a parallel street, more noisy, always busy, next to the roadway, humming with traffic, with a 5-story store for goods and furniture for living, accompanied by immaculate square streets, 9 and 16-story buildings. Dennis himself walked there along the noisy road at other times, when I was distracted from bitter thoughts, when I forgot about that day, but when I remembered, when I wanted to dive into myself, to think, to remember her. Then from school he went not to the right, as usual, and down, and only then, after 2 blocks turned and after 5 minutes, at a leisurely pace, was already walking through the private sector like today, for example. The lazy deserted trees are quiet and calming, rustling rapidly beginning to fall from the shanty leaves, on the soul and the same melancholy as the space surrounding him, disgusted in the past tense, when everything was still good, and everyone was alive. Dennis discovered this street right after his mother's funeral, the very next day, when I left the house in the morning and went wherever his eyes looked. Until recently, the boy indicated that in those places she calms down, it seems like he is being treated, but recently until these strange wooden houses began to frighten him, or rather, not to directly scare, but simply to fill the soul with a strange feeling of something unnatural, wrong. For example, dogs never barked behind the fences here, but in any private house there is no dog, most often it is a barker, but here, not a single bark could be heard behind any fence. Dennis even specifically checked whether he whistled loudly or rattled the rod on the fences or hung deserted bench near the houses, but no response sounds. There were never any caravans driving down the street, but what was even stranger was the absence of people, not just passers-by, but the residents were not found in the courtyards of houses, or if they entered and exited their neat little gates, leaned out of the windows. The fences here weren't that high, and on top of them even a 10th grader could easily see the interior of the courtyards there. Clothes were drying on the ropes, swaying in the gust breeze, swinging with forgotten children's toys. There were forgotten stools. A bucket of wetting was given when they will be brought into the house. There were gardening tools, watering hoses, grew to the Lumbat saints, for which someone is definitely courted, but the preparation with the extra moment of mother's death and discovery. There is not a single resident of the private sector on this street. Dennis, I didn't see it. Strange. It turned out to be strange, and the force that turned the 10th grader, a narrow alley between 2 standard houses, gray and maroon, with 11 to 13 cheeses on the facades. Where are you going? What are you doing there? This is what Dennis's mind was mumbling. But his legs did not obey his mind. They turned the guy around and made him take a few careful steps into the stupidity of the back streets. There doesn't seem to be anything strange. Bushes and withered September grass, dried up after yesterday's rain puddle. Ahead of me there's just another one fence, dead end. Well, what's wrong with this Persian? Dennis was about to turn back, but he bumped in to look at the bricks in front of him. Right in the short and dirty grass, in the shade under the bush, there were 2 bricks on which stood a cistern. The third one was lying on the plank. It looks like a stand, and on top of this stand lay a videotape recorder. A regular black cassette, a brick without a box and without stickers, only scratches are clearly visible, right across the entire surface. They had several video consoles left at home. People like that lived there before the flood. Most of them were thrown out by my father long ago. It's still on the internet. There were 2 or 3 left, on which there were some recordings, family gatherings, trips, vacations, and also there was Mom on them, still normal pre-therapy, before mental hospitalization, and they were all happy there. Even the father was still smiling and hugging Dennis. The cassette lying on the bricks looked completely screwed up, except for the scratches. Dennis wanted to go back outside, but stopped. He shook his head. The alley was deserted and quiet. The boy bent down, reached out, and took the black plastic bricks. A cassette is just a cassette. What if she also has someone's happiness on her? he hurriedly shoved it into his backpack. First entry, Dennis didn't watch the tape right away. At first I even forgot about her. At first I boiled the dumplings that my father bought in packs when I went into the store after working as a firefighter. While I was waiting, I poured some milk and ate a crust of stale bread, loaf of bread, washed down with sugar. I remembered about the cassette when I was already finishing living stale dumplings, poured with cheap ketchup. He hurried and looked for a vidac on the mezzanine. Then I dug through the tangle of cords to connect the covered one. And a decent layer of dust covered the gramophone beeping south of the TV. When I finally got everything set up and took the pulse with half-erased marks in my hand buttons, I realized that I was tired. I thought with a chuckle, what an idiot she is, surely some cartoons. Anticipating disappointment, Dennis pushed the tape into his mouth. From a starving, jobless vidac, pressed on the dust on the remote control to the round button play. The cassette in the depths of the vidac clicked, falling into the grooves. The mechanism started and the film rustled. Several stripes of interference ran across the TV screen, then a bright white-gray spray splashed out, blinding the boy. A ripple of a billion flickering dots of white noise. That's what she thought, Dennis told himself out loud. He is there Rena on her. He didn't finish because the rip twitched and started to cry. Down, giving way to the image. At first, Dennis didn't recognize the room on the screen. First of all, the recording quality was really shitty. Some objects could only be guessed from the counters, chair, windows, armchairs, TV. Secondly, the angle was strange, filmed from somewhere above and at an angle. This is the image that a hidden video camera would produce. For observation, well, and thirdly, Dennis did not expect to see on the found recording own apartment, more precisely, the hall in which he was now sitting in the chairs in front of TV, but there was no one on the screen, just a room not emptied. It was either late evening or just a terrible sacredness, but everything was somehow shaky and grey. As if it were unreal, as if in a dream. Nothing happened there. On this room, and so minute after minute passed. Who filmed this and why? The more time passed, the more anxious I became. Dennis established. He looked at the screen more and more intently. Waiting, something is going to happen now. The complete silence also got to the point. There was no sound either on the screen or here in reality. The boy was afraid to move as suddenly Dennis realized that something was wrong in that room. Wrong door. He's there. Where is their wall? Between the window and the nightstand. In the room there was a door on the screen, and it opened slowly, very much like in a dream. Now the guy looked at the expanding one with fascination. With each passing second it became more and more noticeable what was in the doorway. Someone stands as motionless as everything else on the screen except for that damn door. The quality of the recording did not allow us to see the details, to determine at least some details, but Dennis suddenly became cold and was so scared to the point that I couldn't even move. He suddenly understood, felt who it was. At the level intuition, on the edge of consciousness, mother, the door was almost completely opened. The man remained visible in the opening for a few more seconds, but from below a series of white noise had already floated, filling full screen. Then Veda clicked, Cosita jumped out with such a crash that Dennis almost didn't jump. For several minutes he sat, staring blankly at the switched off the screen from which his own was looking back at him. Reflection, change of clothes. Of course, he didn't say anything about coast. Well, what would he answer? Go here. That's what they generally communicated, rarely. And on Lido the case. My father was on duty at his fire department for 3 days, then 3 I was resting. At the beginning of the day I let loose, then I drank with the same Guin garages, or sometimes he would hang out with his next friend, return in the morning, silent and angry. Yafix with him. Dennis hasn't needed his father for a long time. Another question is what Dennis himself should do with what he saw. He had no intention of re-watching the strange recording. For some reason she terrified him. It seemed like there was nothing scary about her. It's more likely that there was nothing at all, just a silhouette of a man in an open door, but the memory of seeing the little boy gave me goosebumps. On the back, it seemed as if he suddenly looked where he shouldn't have. In some otherworldly place, in a world not ours, a strange one-spite witchcraft ritual. And where did the videotapes accidentally found on the street come from? Not in Dennis's apartment, except for the strange door, which simply could not be there. Okay, I just need to throw this tape away. Curiosity satisfied, but Dennis, contrary to logic and reason, pulled out the bottom drawer. His platinum cabinet and carefully put the video cassette into the hiding place. Several magazines, with naked women, 2 pack cigarettes, which he still couldn't bring himself to start, To the ejector knife given to Seryoga on his last birthday. In a pack of letters my mother wrote when she was young to different people, grandmothers, father, sister. In Moscow. To her strange and creepy sketches on scraps papers that the psychiatrist who convicted her gave her. Let it lie. There was one more question. Should I tell you about Vala's videotapes? They had been dating for several months and went out together. In the evenings, we kissed. Being in love distracted Dennis from the thoughts that I couldn't get it out of my head. Okay, morning and the evening it drains. As she liked to say, mother, everything will resolve itself. In the evening my father came and, strangely enough, stayed at home, but Dennis didn't climb. He just grumbled a little while cleaning up the vidak, forgotten by his son, sat down in front of the TV and whined until the very night. Dennis chatted with Valley on the phone, then looked new anime series. When I went to bed, an image slowly appeared before my eyes. Opening doors. Then he fell asleep. By tomorrow Dennis had already forgotten what was lying in the hiding place. Strange videotape. Life seemed to go on as usual, but not for long. On the fourth day, Dennis found the second tape, the second entry. There was no need to go anywhere to get the second videocassette. She was just lying on the rubber mat in front of the entrance. The door to the apartment, right in the sand from the shoes. A black plastic brick, a twin brother of the one that was lying there now in Dennis's hiding place. There was even a scratch in the same visible place. The boy almost stepped on her. There was a black box on the black rubber mat, not particularly noticeable, but he still saw her in the last ditch. He squatted down, took it in his hand, and twirled it. He looked around. Of course, there was no one in the entrance, and complete silence. Only specks of dust flew in the stale air of the stairwells. Dennis gave a task, opened the door and entered the house, thoughtfully examining the find. He carelessly threw the tape right in the hallway. Nana Veli and her mess, father's things. While I was eating the potatoes my father fried yesterday, I was thinking painfully what to do. Throw away the gift immediately or give it a good whack at the beginning in it with a meat cleaver. Having finished with lunch, I went for the beeper, from behind which there were already sticking out cords and accessories needed to connect to the TV. While I was fiddling around, I automatically noted it to myself how empty my head is. Even the fear that remained after watching the first recording did not remind myself, but now found myself distant and stupid. The remote control fits into the palm of my hand easily, and as usual, Dennis pressed play and stared at the screen. It all started the same way as the first recording. A white flickering noise that after a few seconds halfway down, giving way to a recording without a single sound. Dennis knew the kitchen right away, as well as the dining table. Even the salon and sugar were not in their usual places. Field hand from the one sitting. Yes, there was someone sitting at the table with his back to Dennis. The person sitting there resembled a man in straitjackets, as they show in the movies, gray, dense, with straps that tighten the arms and torso. Only here the cloth was thrown over the head. Therefore, it turned out to be impossible to discern and understand who it was. Moreover, the recording quality remained terrible. Something was only guessed. Dennis, with pain in his eyes, began to peer into Thesa hunched figure sitting on something like a stool, but I couldn't see anything. Figurov began to sit motionless, but then, as if she felt Dennis's gaze fell on her and she began to move, and then she began to twitch, trying to return as if, sniff the old man about his presence. With each passing second, the movements became more and more reminiscent of with convulsions, spasms, and people in epileptic fits. It was incredibly creepy. A light was shining through the window in front of the pole. The kitchen was ordinary, and to him the man in the scary suit looked unnatural, ugly. He clearly didn't belong there. This character twisted and turned. The films became more and more insistent, and more furious, and he felt bad, in pain. Why Dennis decided this, he could not say, but even without sound, in complete silence and extreme in the apartment, I felt in my ears without lightning groans and in the face. His palm tried to feel what had fallen out at the very beginning. Remote controller. This madness had to stop immediately, and it did, but at that very moment, familiar interference and white noise rapidly crawled from below upwards, and in a second filled TV, the cassette, out of the sin of the shot, jumped out of the whole VCR. The boy stared at the extinguishers in silence for a few more seconds. Screen. Then he stood up resolutely, walked over to the balcony door, and opened it wide. Her, and convulsively began to inhale the cold air. Indifferent city. Then he peered cautiously into the kitchen. Everything is as in the recording, except for the strange figure. It's even clear where they were filming from. It was the same angle right in the doorway. The apartment was so quiet and So creepy, just like that time. The day his father came into his room and said that mom is no more. Dennis suddenly felt that when he returned to the TV, there will be someone sitting in the chair. He carefully looked out at the door. Fast forward. Of course, there was no one there. However, the fear did not go away, not just because someone is renting their apartment in video, and not just on a phone, but on an antediluvian one-evening camera, and also somehow adds special effects to the recordings in the form of non-existent doors or strange human figures. It is not clear how, but it adds, otherwise explain what is happening in the recordings. The apartment is often left empty. The father is on duty. He is at school himself. If you want, you can break the lock. It is simple, the door is not iron, and calmly take pictures of the inside of the apartment. But that wasn't the only thing that was scary. Dennis saw people present at the recording's mother. He felt that it was she had always been. Strange, these drawings are hers. The poems are almost always about death, pain, and suffering. A slow clouding of the mind, which is why I had to quit your job and sit at home all day, sit staring out the window. And when one day Dennis, who was still in the 7th grade class, found her sitting on the floor of the balcony door, with a stream of blood dripping from a long strip on his wrist. When she was first taken away for treatment, it became clear his mother is no longer his, and not his mother, but he didn't give up. I kept trying to get through to her mind, but I didn't understand that it is no longer in my mother's head. She smiled in response to his gentle words, to his stroking genuine curly red hair, on his embrace, but gave nothing in return. Sit down, son of ideas, she usually said, and indifferent Lyra turned to contemplating the clouds in the sky, which the 9th floor was always visible, especially well, what she saw there in them. The doctor got tired when she decided to leave. Dennis didn't punish him for this. I felt in my father the relief of a man who had finally thrown off beyond the knife's strength. But what replacements did he get? How did you use the opportunity that opened up? He started drinking and neglected himself and his son. Dennis never took offense at his mother or her decision to leave this world. Apparently, she was not satisfied with this world and she left to look for other worlds more suitable for her violent nature. Imagination. He wasn't offended, and yet they didn't have enough of his mother's strange look, her light hands with a picket of scars on the wrists, her hair growing stubbornly and rapidly. After a haircut for another hospital stay, Dennis lay in bed for over an hour, just looking at ceiling and the sky outside the window. I tried to imagine what she saw there, then I fell asleep, without even realizing it. I woke up in the evening, the fear had subsided. Nothing strange didn't happen anymore. I had to do my homework and do my chores routine. Distracted the boy from the bitter thoughts that gradually went to the border of consciousness. The thing went well, as did the next few days. I haven't decided for myself, no more old honest video consider, and throw out the 2 that are in the hiding place at the first opportunity. The following Friday, before literature class, she approached him. Valia, what are you doing this evening? She asked with her unique sunny smile. Is Dad home, on duty? Dennis said, looking at the smiling lips. Girls. I do nothing. I am expecting a cutie to visit. Valia mumbled. Pretty? Oh no, the most beautiful one. And what time? Otherwise, I might want to come. At about 5 o'clock, and it swam in the water. Let's see. The girl laughed, then became serious. At 5, let's do it by six. My parents are at home. I need to do my homework. They won't let me go to you. Okay, I'll think of something. I'll tell my friend she went to see her. To Svetka Maximova. She rang Dennis's doorbell at 6:30 in the evening. 3rd entry. The devil made him say it. When they kissed so much that it had to be translated breathing, and Valia began to button up your long buttons on the blouse. Dennis suddenly boasted, you know, I was almost cuckoo here and didn't even go. The girl straightened her hair and looked at the guy playfully. What's wrong? He already regretted that he hadn't bitten his tongue in time. But Valia, there was no stopping it. Have fun, boy. Are you feeling depressed again, my dear? You are good. She gently hugged him by the shoulders and leaned against him, her cheeks flushed. And with her cheek to her neck, she kissed him behind the ear. It's not scary anymore, but tenderly and affectionately, like my mother once did. Briefly speaking, Dennis relaxed. Yes, I found the cassette here. Vito's scary ass. How did this come about? Valia pulled away. You see, the first one was just lying on the street. I picked it up, looked, and there was a second one that she was lying on the rug. I'll confirm it straight away, mind you. Oh come on. Valia suddenly became serious. What the hell is this? Are you kidding me? She was relieved and laughed. I'm not kidding. Honestly, from the recording these are strange. What? Seriously, show me. Dennis recoiled. No, What are you talking about? Which means you made it all up. It's not funny. It was painful. There was no pain for a long time. Dennis rushed into his room, climbed into the hiding place. There were 3 videotapes lying there. The guy, not believing his eyes, took out all 3. They were absolutely identical, and there was a scratch on each one, in the same place. Oh, what's wrong? Valia couldn't sit still in the hall. She crept up on Dennis without being heard. Are you hiding, Radiku? No, Valia. Dennis hesitated. Damn it, there are already 3 of them. How 3, Racina? Valia responded, taking out a pack of letters from the hiding place. Wow, letters. Does anyone else write them? These are my mother's. Dennis is angry and took the letters away. Carefully put it back in place. All that I found. Don't laugh, and they dare. Valia smiled quietly. I understand, baby. She hugged his back and pressed herself against him. Then she came to her senses. So how many creepy bones did you find? I spoke alone, and now it's already 3. There was definitely pain. I know I found one myself. The second one was planted, maybe, and the third. Here. He twirled the top one in his hands, although I don't know which one it is. All the same, like triplets. Discarded. Wow, cool. Enough chatter. Show me. Come on. Valia stood up resolutely. Well, what are those weird notes? Surely some kind of wedding or something. No, there. Dennis twirled the knucklebone in his hands hesitantly. How to explain what is there? Or should I really show it? Maybe Valiushka will take a look from the side and say that all this is nonsense. They will laugh together and there will be relief. This time the Vidak was connected in just a couple of minutes. Cositas seemed to be waiting to be swallowed by the rectangular graze. The parota. I almost ended up there myself. It rustled passionately. Inside. Greedily, Valia sat down in the chair next to Dennis. She pressed her hot thigh against mine. I hugged you and forbade you. She stared at the screen with a smile. He pressed play. It turned out to be a really new recording of the familiar saw. The shimmering ripple slept evilly below, disappeared off the edge of the screen, revealing an unexpectedly familiar picture. School corridors. Dennis even understood some floor of their school. Third, although the quality was terrible again. It is precisely this kind of honor board that hangs on the 3rd floor. There is literature near the office. This time the image was not static. The operator moved forward slowly. Sometimes he moved the cameras around. Top ascent and swayed. Regular shoulder shot. This is what Valia whispered in confusion. Our Skinner, Dennis confirmed in an unexpectedly muffled voice. I told you, the recording is terrible. A fear returned with renewed vigor. Despite the presence of a loved one nearby, again it was unclear what to be afraid of. Someone is walking around the school, filming. However, the recording was frightening. Deserted corridors, cold colors, constant interference and ripples. The camera peered into the open offices, and Dennis became tense. In anticipation of something creepy, but there was only emptiness. There were regular school desks, educational posters on the walls, and in yourself. There were pens and textbooks on some of the tables. There were backpacks somewhere, only there were no people. As if they had just come out just for a minute, but the activists had already been biting into Dennis's hand for a long time. Booth didn't even notice the pain. He kept his eyes on the screen. The camera wove across the 3rd floor and emerged onto the landing. Stairs, turned down to the flights. The picture was so familiar. The cameraman stood on the platform for a few seconds, and then slowly moved down. He went down to the floor and slowly looked around the corner, as if peeping at someone. Well, there was no one here. Either. Dennis realized where he was heading. Valia whispered, there are offices there. Their 10th bubble is assigned to the algebra and geometry class. The camera moved there. Turn it off. Valia told them about it in a friend's story. Turn it off. This is disgusting. I don't want to see this. Why did you film this? I didn't film it, Dennis responded indignantly. I'm telling you, turn it off. Dennis began to press the pause button with excitement, then rewind, then navkal, and no result. She wrote it down as if nothing had happened. Valia fell silent. One of them raised his head, stared at the screen, and already I couldn't take my eyes off him. Their office was opened by Nastish, but the operator slowed down a few steps before him and was now moving very, very slowly. So carefully, as if he knew. There's someone there. Camera began to slowly peer into the doorway. Here is the board. There is something written on it. It's not clear what. The front desks are deserted. Teacher's desk, iron on the windows. Another careful turn was made a couple of centimeters further. There must be something there. There must definitely be something there. A strip of ripples ran down from below, foreshadowing the end of the recording. She slowly but surely got evil up, and when she reached the middle, Dennis screamed and jumped back. There in the middle of their class, right next to his desk. I in the fourth row, in the middle, stood a figure. At this point, the white noise reached the top of the screen. And completely concealed what was happening. There was a loud click as the film stopped. Cosita, out of misfortune, jumped out of Vedek's foster nest. Pause. The girl remained silent. They both remained silent. Dennis waited a couple of seconds and turned his gaze to Varya. The floor was placed there. It didn't move. I just looked at the floor. Val, well, I'm sorry, you did it yourself. I'll go. She jumped up abruptly. Dennis rushed after her in fear and tried to say something. With a feigned chuckle, explain that all this is nonsense. Nothing helped. Valia didn't say anything else. She looked away, but was quick and grabbed the hanger's jacket, and without saying a word, she ran out the door. As for the guy Renault, he found only a fractional knock on the door. Valia didn't even call the elevator. Crap. Dennis broke free and returned to the apartment. Here I go, found something to amuse you. On the other hand, she herself insisted. Dennis began to pacing back and forth. He was very worried about Valusia. I'll have to call her and find out when she left. Maybe it will clear up a bit in the air. He'll come to his senses and calm down. They will laugh. They quarreled like everyone else, but not seriously, and very rarely. His Valieshka was cheerful and not at all afraid, and generally the best in the world. This time, what came over her, however, worrying in his mind for his beloved, Dennis felt another, much stranger and more mysterious concern. Something he had just seen on the screen was exciting under the consciousness. Weighed on me and did not give me peace. Something he noticed out of the corner of his eye. Or it's just his imagination. He passed by the vidac several times, squinting at the rectangular black videotape tongue. They just need to press a little with their finger, and Bibiki will obediently accept the little brick into his belly, start recording. Then perhaps the question that torments Dennis will be resolved. Then maybe Dennis will find out who was there. At the very end, just a memory, empty, silent. School. The screen was creepy, always noisy, lively, filled with children, talking, screaming, smiling, alive, suddenly turned out to be empty, extinct, unnatural. It was so wrong. Dennis pressed his finger on the cassette. Vidac absorbed it, clicked, started working, rustled. The change took only a minute. At Algebra's office, Dennis stopped the recordings and then turned them on. Frame by frame playback. He began to study the screen carefully, periodically clicking the forward button, and there are clothes on the fact that the standing figure is just for him. It seemed like a dream, but it didn't come true. Of the fact that there was someone standing at his desk in the classroom became clear from the very beginning. A shadow on the floor, someone's shadow. It's strange, but it wasn't cast from the light source, an ordinary window with daylight. She's a turnover, like well, it was as if there was another source out of sight. Sveta, then a strip of white noise appeared. Here Dennis pressed his face to the screen, and his eyes widened. He recognized the dress, the very edge of chic, already on the verge of interference. Mom's favorite, bright burgundy with an angular pattern with yellow stripes with ornament. She was wearing it that very day. That's why the blood didn't stand out so much on it. The recording was interrupted, and the C cassette suddenly jumped out from the Vedic with such force that it whistled past his head, crashed into an empty chair. Dennis jumped up, grabbed the cassette and threw it at the wall. He cringed, expecting the spray of plastic shards, but it hit with a dull sound, like a stone hitting a stone. She bounced back onto the carpeted floor, completely unharmed. Then Dennis rushed towards her and kicked her with his heel. He didn't do her any harm. Then Dennis hit her with all his might so hard that she flew far under the sofa. Rewind. Valia didn't come to school the next day. Seryoga is his friend and classmate. The first thing I asked about her was, I don't know, but the game is on. Dennis responded indifferently, maybe she got sick. In fact, he was scared. The day before he called Valley all day. At first, she simply didn't pick up the phone, but on the 10th tried an indifferent female voice began to report that the subscriber is out of network coverage. So, the whole evening and the following morning, she didn't come the next day either, and the next day too. Dennis was now walking around blacker than a thundercloud. It became clear that nothing terrible had happened. Find out what was possible in only one way. Valia's mother, headmistress Andreevna, opened the door. Neither she, nor Valina, nor Dennis' father were loved, what my daughter has talked about many times. Moreover, they demanded that she not communicate with him. They thought that Vala needed to study, and the young man, whose mother committed suicide a year ago, was unlikely to have any beneficial effect on their child. And you, Chief Andreevna, didn't say hello. You stared at me. What do you want? And Dennis started Valentina, but Sexia, seeing the eyes, Gladly Andreevna. Dragged, she just doesn't go to school. Doesn't answer the call. We're all worried in class, can it help? And how we go ahead? Gladly Andreevna stepped back, letting Dennis through. Into the hallway. He stood there for a while, looking closely at the guy, then she died and looked away. I in the hospital, Valia. Dennis felt cold. How? 3 days ago she went somewhere. Valia's mother continued, where didn't you say? It seems like to some friend, to some Svetka. I returned not feeling myself, straight to my room. It was quiet for a couple of hours. I thought he was doing his homework. Well done, the woman sniffled. It was strange to Dennis that she was talking to him at all. Apparently she needed to get out of it, and then such a scream, so loud and terrible that I run in. She'll kill herself on the floor. Walking, head straight across the parquet, and the eyes, huge and looking at the ceiling, as if she saw whom he can't even take his eyes off. I was at a loss. I was in a stupor. Then I called an ambulance. They really arrived quickly. They have already called a psychiatric hospital themselves. There's something in the injection. Vala just switched off. Claudia Andreevna fell silent. Where is she now? Dennis asked for glucose. His heart was squeezed so hard that it collapsed and turned into a tiny black hole, which is now rapidly sucked in everything around. Do not carry the earth, all those around you, all the past and the future life, and himself. I in the second, the psychiatric department. No one is allowed to see her stable, serious condition. They say it's unlikely. Not. She didn't finish. She finally burst into tears, hissed something on her tray and jumped out of the hallway. Dennis wanted to go straight away, but that would have been too much. That's too rude. Valley could have told his mother nothing, but she told him, and now it's so easy to run away without saying goodbye. Not good. Dennis just stood there and stood there. I waited and waited, Claudia Andreevna, but she didn't come and was walking. The boy suddenly noticed that out of the corner of his eye. He turned his head to the nightstand under the hanger and stared. To a strange thing, from under the clothes, neatly folded on the nightstand, protruded familiar, black, plastic corner. Fourth entry. I had to run out the door without waiting for Claudia Andreevna. Dennis hoped that she would forgive him for his rudeness, and for what he took with him. Although most likely, Claudia Andreevna didn't even know that the videocassette, with the familiar scratch, was located in her hallway. So formally it is not theft. Stealing is when you take something that belongs to someone else. To a person, the cassette probably doesn't belong to anyone. While he was rushing home, the most interesting thoughts were spinning in his head. Different thoughts. What if there are clues in the next recording, something that can help Valley, or something that will explain what is happening? Why is this happening to him at all, exactly with him? What if this? Mother, what if she's sending, well, signals? He quickened his pace. The cassette entered the VCR in the morning, as usual. As if he was just waiting greedily to take it in, his gift to play. White noise. Let's go. And again a familiar place. Dennis recognized him instantly. This time, that same strange street, in one off nooks and crannies where he found the first videotape recorder. The cameraman was filming one of the houses, nothing special. And no different from the rest. The camera moved a little to the left and right, but only a little. And did not come closer. As always, there was no sound. So, about 5 minutes passed statically and nothing happened. No one passed by, no one drove cars. Only the branches of the trees trembled silently in the wind, behind a low fence, grass and bushes. A couple of times Dennis wondered what kind of new thing was in the window. The house shook, but it could have been in connection with which the guy was looking into the screen. Or just a simple interference during recording, but something had to happen. It wasn't just for nothing that they rented this house, without people, loneliness flying through the air. They couldn't just be like that. The boy's eyes became dry with a devastating gaze, and he blinked. The same second, a figure appeared in the frame on the left. Dennis recognized her from the first slow steps with us, moving. I feel like I'm in a lingering nightmare. Mother, that same burgundy dress with yellow ornament. The arms hang limply along the body, the steps seem mechanical. A slow step and a second's pause in place, step freeze, face smeared, quality as before, horrible, pixel has been added, but Dennis would not confuse her with anyone in the world. He watched, mesmerized, as the figure slowly approached. To the litka, the image wavered and began to move a little closer. One could see how the limp palm dropped on the handle. The door to the wicket slowly floated inward, insanely slow. Mom. Dennis whispered. He didn't want her to come in, he didn't. However, Mom moved towards the door, still just as slowly, as if she was walking in water. barely moving. Legs, the gate closed very slowly. Dennis saw his mother's shadow stopped. I kept waiting for her to move inside, into the courtyard club. There was no movement. The gate finally closed, white noise floated and the film jumped out of the bucket. Dennis stood up only to push the tape back. He looked through the inventory again. This time sitting right on the floor in front of the TV, and once again, and again, removal. The decision had to be made immediately, but Dennis didn't want to do it in the evening either. I should have waited until the morning. However, he could not simply go to bed and get a good night's sleep. His father was not there, and Dennis no longer remembered when he came home for the last time. And did he come at all? I didn't feel like eating either. I didn't want anything at all. Mom, no. His girlfriend went crazy because of him. The father became distant and essentially an outsider. The phone didn't ring. The boy was terribly consumed by loneliness. It devoured him. It tore apart pieces of his flesh, his soul. And greedily devoured them before his eyes. Lying in bed, looking at the ceiling, he saw only fragments, creepy and strange notes, a shadow of his life, lonely and silent. Dennis woke up early, around 6. His father still hadn't shown up. He hurriedly washed himself, got dressed and rushed out to the strange street. I started looking for that very house, but they were all alike, like two peas in a pod, like videotapes. Twins, with wooden, antique, with unnatural carvings, windows, per metal roofs, chimneys, of which there was not a thick smoke, with low fences and gates. Twins. The guy tried to remember the picture from the screen. Where did they film from? Suddenly he noticed something he had not noticed before. A house numbers there. The 7th, the 11th is longer. Where is the 9th? And behind the 11th, the 17th, where are the rest? What should we do now? Happen in all the corners in a row. I should have looked at the recordings again. Maybe there's a clue there. Dennis is already doomed to the Dvina. At 6 o'clock back home, turned around. I'll say at last. A white plate with the number 13 caught his eye. He had definitely never seen a number like that. As if infected, he approached the house, which seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Exactly the same. This is him. He is a tree. Bushes in front of the gate. We filmed from here. The hand itself pressed the button. Before the deluge bell rang, you could clearly hear the house shaking, but there was no sound in response. One more press, the ringing of the bell, and then silence again. There is no one at home. This is also possible. Dennis stood on the chain, trying to look over the fence. He saw an ordinary courtyard, an ordinary private house, nothing strange, flowers and paths, bushes, and in the bushes in the distance, opposite the wall, someone was standing, some figure, with its back turned. Dennis went cold. He saw only vague outlines. The details were hidden leaves and branches of a tall bush, but there was definitely someone there. Someone stood motionless, not moving. In burgundy clothes. Hey, Dennis called loudly. The figure stood motionless, and he raised his voice. Hey, sorry. No response. It was uncomfortable to stand on the chains. My palms went numb. Dennis banged on the gate and started to press the bell. Dashingly, joyfully and hastily. This went on for several minutes until the collet clicked. And it didn't open so unexpectedly that Dennis jumped back. There was a girl standing on the threshold. Usually the child is about 10 years old, with pigtails, simple dress. The girl stared at the guy, cunning and completely without fear. Smiling. There, Dennis pointed his hand into the depths of the yard. Who do you have there? Nobody. The girl answered instantly and stared at Dennis again. There was no surprise or curiosity in her eyes. With all her wide and sly smile, she looked for some reason. She's scared eyes, cold and prickly. Perrin moved towards the gate, but the girl stood across it in the course and said unexpectedly, "You were not here." She said it calmly and confidently, although she was twice as old. Smaller than Dennis. Then she stepped aside and extended her hand to the side. Those very bushes, and she's not there. There really was no one in the bushes. Dennis saw it clearly and distinctly. Bushy branches, leaves, wall. No figure in burgundy. Who are you? Dennis asked. About the news. The girl smiled even wider. But very quickly the face became serious, the eyebrows dropped and the lips pursed. Nobody, she said, looking into Dennis's eyes. Goodbye, Dennis. And she closed 2 gates. So quickly that he didn't even have time to interfere or set up. Like, hey, he shouted through the door. Open it. I will. He hit the door hard. Yes, it swung open unexpectedly. There was no one on the other side of the doorway. 5. Recording. Stop. Dennis didn't go to school either tomorrow or the next day. A father never came, and Dennis was no longer waiting for him, quickly erasing from memory. He didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Mostly I sat in a chair, looking at the turned-off screen. Or lay, leaving the ceiling. Sometimes he walked aimlessly around the apartment. Sometimes I would fall into a strange state, reminiscent of detachment. Then he sought his mother, but these were no longer the same memories of, for example, how they went to the sea, and Mom was white. She overtook Dennis with her grips and waved her hand at him. Or how they walked with their mother across a sunny meadow and picked huge balls of dandelions. Or how Mom sat on the bed next to someone who was very sick, Deniska, and stroked his head. Something hissed. No, now Mom was the only one to see in her, motionless Denny, where instead of a face there is a mental point of white noise. It was terrible and unbearable. Then Dennis closed his eyes, grabbed his head, stood up. I took a few steps around the apartment. I don't know what to do and where to go. He physically felt like he was going crazy. I am the last especially strong attack. Dennis climbed into the hiding place. It was empty there. A thick layer of dust, cobwebs, garbage. A bore, no letters. Dennis screamed, loudly and desperately. It seemed to him that now he would never see again her, even in the form of the power of this shadow or not a clear figure, on pixel screened. He ran out of his room into the hall. The TV was on, set to play video. Vidac was also on, and the window was lit on the panel. Inside Cosette, Dennis lifted the curtain and looked in. There was nothing inside. Empty mechanism. The icon was lit, and Dennis took hold of the remote control and sat down. In the chair, his white-haired man, his fingers were shaking. He pressed the button with difficulty. Play. White noise. A room slowly appeared on the screen. This was the room where Dennis was now, and here he is, too, sitting in a chair. On the screen, the guy didn't come back. A filming was supposed to be going on, but it went there, from that corner. But of course there was no one there. The image on the TV moved forward, getting closer, kept floating and floating. His head, then a face came closer. New approach. Pupil. The image floated into the darkness of the pupil. However, the blackness immediately began to brighten. A new image appeared that was showing up slowly and inexorably. A man sitting in something burgundy, face invisible. Terrible interference. But Dennis didn't need to look closely. He knew perfectly well who it was. She took something in her hand, short, oblong, thin, pointed. She raised it higher and swung it, and Dennis, unable to look at the screen, closed his eyes. For the first time, a sound was heard. A groan of pain. Another, even stronger. Dennis pressed his palms against his skull, pressing them into the skull box, but the groans did not become quieter. On the contrary, they intensified. To these were added the screams and the sound of clothes being cut. And flesh. Don't watch or listen to what was happening on the screen. It was unbearable, impossible, monstrous. There could be only one way out. He downloaded. With long, swift steps, he reached the balcony doors, pressed the handle, pulled the door towards himself without stopping. Blue seconds without thinking. He stepped with one foot onto the box next to the open one. Nastia is shocked to go outside. The second one, on the window frame, he pushed off from her harder and flew. Only then did the sounds jerk upward and begin to move away. Very quickly the long-awaited, blissful silence came. Go low and be able to relax, and even smile, looking onto the approaching asphalt. Intriguing music.